Shalom, Shlomo.
Shalom Aleichem, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, great. Yourself?
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem.
Every day is a miracle, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So
how are your plans for Aliyah working out? You're getting closer.
We're working on it. We've been working on other things. We should be working more on our paperwork, but I guess the other stuff seems more pressing because we have an apartment in Baca, but we wanted to coordinate because we had no idea how long things might take to do any kind of remodeling and stuff. And there are always issues. But as it turns out, we hired an architect who during the lockdown was within the lockdown distance of our apartment.
Oh,
so
that's convenient. That was great.
It's less than a kilometer away.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we're very excited. We realize it's not gonna be an easy path. We have a number of friends who made Aliyah just in the last year. I mean, over the years, but certainly in the last year, and it's an interesting additional level of negotiations.
The paperwork is daunting, I think.
Yeah, it certainly has discouraged us a little bit. Not in terms of Aliyah, just in terms of getting to it.
Well, Aleichem, Rebbe.
Okay, that's what we got. Just okay.
So tonight, before the Chumash, I'll send out the link.
Okay, I may end up doing the entire Chumash here by Zoom rather than in person. There's still people who are still running around with active COVID, so
that's not good.
No.
People are not isolating when they're positive?
Well, I'm trying to find out, but there have been people running around that just tested positive after Yom Tov.
Got it.
Which was one of the given risks. We were really pretty careful, so I'm not that concerned about it. We had people with, anybody who was carrying Sefer Torah and moving around was wearing a face shield on top of the mask.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so we were pretty careful, but that doesn't mean that, so listen, if it's in the air, it's in the air.
Right. Careful helps, but it's not a guarantee.
That's right. Yeah. All right, I just wanted to continue a little bit. We started yesterday with the Tub continues. There's another whole paragraph that I didn't even see yesterday. And I think that it's important to do it before we get into the rest of the Hilchos Chanukah. He says, because, we have a tendency to say, that Klal Yisrael was dominated by Greek and Roman thought and beliefs and took over, at the time of the Chashmonaim, it was the Meshiavanim, the Hellenists, those who had become contaminated by Yavan, by Greek philosophy and Greek beliefs and religion. He says, so we generally say they were contaminated, therefore Klal Yisrael was in a lowly madrega. And therefore, the Hashmonaim had to go and fight to try and lift up the darkness that had been permeated by Malchus Yavan, by Greek culture. He says, we got it backwards. The only reason why it was possible for Greek culture to permeate Klal Yisrael was because we were missing something that should have prevented it. He says, and that's what ultimately says that the second bias was nechah because of asin chinam. He says, if there wasn't enough Avos Yisrael, if there would have been enough Avos Yisrael, none of Klal Yisrael would have gone into Greek culture. It's only because we were missing our Avos Yisrael, and it started from the beginning of Bayesheni. Therefore, Greek culture could take over our own sense of who we were, because we came out of Babel, we came out of the Babylonian exile, we came out of the Golus Babel, and the very reality was that much of Klal Yisrael never came back to Eretz Yisrael. They stayed in Babel, and Ezra and Nehemiah and the other Nevi'im were very critical of Klal Yisrael's non-willingness to come back to Eretz Yisrael. There were several families of Levium who refused to come back. So he banned them from ever doing any avodah in the second Beis Hamikdash. Some families of Kohanim and Levium were banned from doing the avodah in the second Beis Hamikdash because they had refused originally to come back. When the call went out to come back to them, because it's possible to do that by the Beis Hamikdash, he says, how is it possible that a Levi is given the opportunity to come back to the Beis Hamikdash and to do the avodah, the Kohanim could do the avodah? And they said, no, we'd rather stay in Babel. So he says, so the essence of Klal Yisrael was already fragmented by the time the second bias started. And therefore, because there wasn't enough Avos Yisrael, there wasn't enough Achdus in Klal Yisrael, therefore, Malchus Yavin could have an effect upon Klal Yisrael. Therefore, Greek culture could permeate and distort Klal Yisrael. And it wasn't a small amount of distortion. Besides the fact that the Mishabnim had all of the political power because they associated themselves with the Greek Assyrians. But Greek philosophy and Greek culture permeated all the way through the times of the Rambam. From the beginning, from the last 300 years, 100 years into the Bayesheni. So that puts us into the Rambam is 1200, about 1200. So we're talking about 1,000 years of Greek philosophy, Greek culture, Greek mindset permeated to the point that we almost didn't know what real Torah, what Torah Hashkafa was. And that's what the Rambam came to battle back to try and at least reconcile so that people could say, yes, it's possible to be a philosopher and still believe in Torah and still keep Torah mitzvahs. And then came the light of the Zohar, which brought Klal Yisrael, the essence of Klal Yisrael, back to its emunah, to our own understanding, but it must have been lost for 1,000 years. So the second Beis Hamikdash was a time of lack of achdus of Klal Yisrael, and that lack of achdus was what shattered the emunah of Klal Yisrael and allowed Malchus Yavin, allowed Hellenism to take over, dominate all of Klal, dominate the Malchus, dominate the thoughts, dominate behavior of Klal Yisrael. So he says that, he says it's a really interesting thought. He says, as in previous times in Klal Yisrael, who are the ones who held on to that emunah? He says that Isha Yiras Hashem Hi Tisalo. It was the women of Klal Yisrael who held on to that emunah. And that's the reason why women are forbidden to do malacha b'shas, the time of the Chanukah eras. Because they're the ones that upon their emunah, the strength of Isha Yiras Hashem, it's their connection that they never wavered in their compromise. And that's why he says essential that the Malchus Yavin was shoyle b'bnei Sehem. They tried to weaken Klal Yisrael by corrupting the women of Klal Yisrael. And the women of Klal Yisrael resisted. The women of Klal Yisrael went into hiding. Women of Klal Yisrael committed suicide rather than compromise themselves. And it was that daughter of Matisho Kohen Gadol who forced her father and brothers to stand up and take a fight. She says that's why that's why women are mechuyev in Ner Chanukah and also in Melacha while the Ner is lit, because the test of Malchus Yavin was not in physical persecution. It wasn't like Purim. Purim, we were threatened with physical persecution, with physical threat to our survival. But that was on the physical level. During Malchus Yavin, the Klal Yisrael was actually, fairly well-to-do. There was quite a kind of upper class of Hellenistic Jews who were well-to-do. And it wasn't a time of poverty. It wasn't a time of physical and material suffering, but it was the time of a tremendous weakening of Yiras Hashem. So since the battle was to bring back Yiras Hashem, that was the light of the menorah. Light of the menorah was so that we could see clearly what Hashem wants us to see, with the light that comes directly through the Kodesh HaKadoshim to the menorah to Klal Yisrael. That would give us back the clarity we need to say, no, that's idolatry. That's a denial of the existence of Hashem. It's a denial of the essence and truth of Torah. And so it would appear that while Bnei Yisrael were in Bavel, that they were managed to rebuild the Torah of the famous Torah institutions of Bavel. They were not quite as affected by Greek philosophy because they were under Persian rule, and the Persians and the Greeks didn't get along very well. There were two empires who were clashing. And Persia had their idols, but they didn't allow themselves to be contaminated by Greek philosophy, by Greek culture. They had their own culture. And it was, according to talking to some, I would call modern day Iranians, Persians, that until 1948, the Persian Jews lived with a great deal of autonomy. They were respected. They were part of Persian culture. They weren't affected. They were maybe affected by some of the Persian and the Muslim culture, but not affected by Greek culture, Greek philosophy. And so it was that weakness of our emunah and betachon in Eretz Yisrael that would allow the orla to grow. That would allow the barrier to grow between Klal Yisrael and Kodesh Baruch Hu, until, as we talked about yesterday, the Ka'anim B'Ledim came to battle with the purity of that Pach Shemen, that essence that Klal Yisrael held on to that had not yet been corrupted. And that's why they had to find the Pach Shemen in order for them to start regenerating and rejuvenating the Beis HaMikdash, because everything else around them had already been contaminated. Everything else had already been compromised by Greek culture. And so, as we see from Shlomo Melech, Kishem HaTorah, Hashem Torah, the Klal Yisrael Torah is compared to oil, fragrant oil. What's the definition of fragrant oil? Oil that had been infused with fragrant spices. You don't have to touch it. Simply by pouring it from one vessel to the next, the room becomes filled with the fragrance of the aroma of the fragrance of the oil. And that's one of the Mishalim that they give that on Shir Hashirim. The Klal Yisrael, the difference is a person who walks into a tannery will walk out smelling terrible. And a person who walks into a perfume store will come out smelling good. Even if neither one of them bought anything, even if neither of them took anything out of there, it's where you put yourself, that's what you're going to smell like. Where you place yourself, that's what you're going to carry with you. And so that was the koyach of the Kohanim, that they said, listen, we have to make sure that we're putting ourselves back into the place where Klal Yisrael smells good. Put us back into the Beis HaMikdash. Just purify, remove all of the putrid effects of Hellenism from the Beis HaMikdash. That would then respark the growth of Klal Yisrael, of Torah and Eretz Yisrael. She says, and that's the reason why you can't say Hespedim on Chanukah. Because Chanukah is a time for us to look towards that which we get from Hashem, and the Hesped it focuses on what Hashem takes away from us. And since we get focused on it, and we end up creating, Hesped creates, so it gives koyach to the Sitra Achra. Because the more that we get involved in the sadness and the loss and the sense of our own vulnerability, the more we're susceptible and vulnerable to the Yetzer Hara. And that's the reason why an Oinen is not allowed to do any mitzvahs, because he's in not a place of Kedusha, not a place of Simcha. And that's why the restrictions of Avelos upon an Avel are so severe, because we're not in a place where we can go out and generate Torah and Simcha. So if that's the case, if we're being affected, so better stay at home. Don't go out. Don't go out and try and make the world into something that you can't do. Chanukah is the exact opposite. Chanukah is, take the neis, pursue and go out and show the world the light of Torah. Go out and show the world that there is a place of Simcha in the world. And that's also the reason why there's no Tanaisim. Because a Tanais is to say, listen, there's a piece of myself in which I feel that I'm not worthy enough. I need to do tshuva for it. I need to fast. There's a sense of something is missing in our world. Chanukah, focus on the light. Focus on what is giving, what we give to the world, not what we're missing in our world. But it's all the spiritual, not the physical, and therefore we're not kaveya suudos as part of the simchas Chanukah. So you can have a suda, but don't get lost in the suda. The suda is only so that we should get together, say divrei Torah, and sing zmiros and praise Hashem for having given us the nisim and the niflos that show us that we can stand up against the world around us and not allow the world around us to preoccupy, to blind us from the reality of Hashem's presence in our world. He's got a number of very deep thoughts here, which I need to finish absorbing. But I wanted to carry that conversation, that piece of the conversation forward, because definitely Hilchos Chanukah then is, how do we take the menorah and create that light of Torah? How are we going to rekindle that light of Torah, the clarity that comes from a Torah perspective on life? We become so preoccupied with what they're thinking and what they're doing and and we lose sight of our own pride of who we are. We fight the power of Torah to dispel the darkness. So we're in a time of Hest upon him, and the answer to Hest upon him is Or HaTorah, the light of Torah. So let's continue to try and create more and more light, rather than get preoccupied in the fears and the anxieties and the depressions of being trapped in a world of darkness. Let's go out and create more light. So Be'ez Hashem, next week we'll go on to Tafrei Shayin Aleph. Fridays, still have another couple of weeks of Friday. We can still hop around, maybe a couple of minutes on Friday at 3 o'clock. Be'ez Hashem will be zeicher to Shabbos Bereishis. Hashem will renew the world. Bereishis, brother. Yisrael.
Amen. Yes. Shkoyach, Rebbe.
Shkoyach, Rebbe. Thank you.
Good.
Have a good day, Rebbe.
Get Shuli to post his shiur. We posted Wednesday's shiur. He said he'll post Thursdays and today's. So he'll be able to catch up.
Oh, Baruch Hashem. Have a good day, Rebbe.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Be well.